Here I am, 10 years into a marriage that I thought was solid as a rock, and suddenly everything's falling apart. It's kind of laughable, isn't it? How you can be so sure you have everything under control, only to realize you've been completely oblivious the whole time. Emily and I used to be the couple everyone looked up to, doing everything together. We traveled, ran marathons, shared interests like hiking and cooking. It was perfect, or at least it felt that way. But then, life got in the way. I threw myself into work, long hours, more responsibility. You know how it goes. I wasn't slacking on our marriage, but apparently, I wasn't doing enough either. Emily started changing. She became short with me, irritated by the smallest things. I'd come home drained, but still willing to talk, only to find her glued to her phone or watching some mindless TV show. If I tried to bring anything up, she'd roll her eyes and say, "Do we really need to talk about this now?" Then the complaints started, non-stop complaints. At first, it was the usual stuff like, "We don't go out anymore," or "Why don't you plan anything anymore?" Maybe she had a point, but it soon turned into personal jabs. It was things like, "You've become so predictable, James. You're boring." That one hit hard. I never imagined I'd be the guy who gets called boring by his own wife. But there it was, right in front of me, like a slap to the face. So I tried. God, I really tried. I booked a romantic weekend getaway, thinking it would shake things up. Maybe that's what we needed, a little reset. I thought it would remind us of what we used to be. You know what she said? "I have work. I can't just drop everything for a vacation." And then came the excuses. Always the damn excuses. That's when the late nights started. "Work's been crazy, babe," she'd say. "I have to stay late." Then came the business trips. At first, I didn't think much of it. She'd always been more career-driven than I was. But then, things started shifting. It was subtle at first, small changes. She'd come home from the gym looking all done up, like she hadn't broken a sweat. She started caring a lot more about how she dressed, buying new clothes, and spending ridiculous amounts of time on her hair and makeup. But it wasn't for me, that's for sure. I tried to ignore it at first, told myself I was just being paranoid. I didn't want to be that guy, the insecure husband who jumps to conclusions just because his wife is working late. But it started eating at me. There were nights she wouldn't come home until the middle of the night. When I asked where she was, she'd get all defensive. No real answers, just vague excuses. "Don't you trust me? I'm working hard for us." Then there was that one night. I was sitting there, waiting for her to come home, and she didn't pick up the phone. I kept staring at it like an idiot, checking the time, sending more texts. Nothing. By midnight, my stomach was in knots. I even started thinking maybe something terrible had happened, maybe a car accident or something. But at the same time, that horrible feeling of suspicion crept up my spine. When she finally came in around 1 a.m., she just shrugged it off and gave me some half-baked work emergency excuse. No apology. No real explanation. The next morning, she left for work like nothing had happened, leaving her phone on the table. And yeah, I know what you're thinking. I shouldn't have gone through her phone. I should have respected her privacy. But honestly, I didn't care. Something was off, and I needed to know what it was. I'm not proud of it, but I opened it. And there it was. A message from Nathan. Damn Nathan. Some guy from her office I'd heard about a few times, but didn't really know. The message was pretty clear. "Last night was fun. Let's do it again soon." And then that damn winky face. My heart dropped. It felt like the floor was just swallowed up beneath me. My hands started shaking. My first instinct was to throw the phone across the room, but I didn't. Instead, I took a deep breath and set it back exactly where I found it. I didn't confront her right then and there. I wanted to, but I needed to cool off, figure out what to do next. My mind was spinning. The late nights, the business trips, the way she'd been dressing. Like she was trying to impress someone else, just not me. It all made sense now. And damn, I was furious. But more than anything, I felt stupid. Stupid for not seeing it sooner. Stupid for buying into all her lies. When she came home that night, I didn't say a word. I just watched her. Of course, she didn't notice. She was on her phone again, probably texting Nathan, laughing at some stupid joke they shared. And there I was, sitting across from her, trying not to completely lose it. It's crazy how fast things can fall apart. One moment, you think you have everything together, and the next, your life feels like a total joke. That's where I found myself, sitting in my own house next to my wife, who was clearly seeing someone else. And I still couldn't bring myself to say it out loud. But I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. After finding that message from Nathan, I couldn't just sit around and pretend everything was fine. My gut was screaming at me. This wasn't just a work thing. I had to know the truth. You know that feeling when you just know something's wrong, but you're still missing pieces of the puzzle? That was me. Every time she came home late, or had one of those business trips, it felt like she was sticking a knife in a little deeper. It started with the little things. I noticed Emily suddenly throwing herself into the gym again. She'd always been into fitness, but for a while, it seemed like she wasn't as focused. Now, she was spending hours there, coming home in these skin-tight outfits that made her look way too good for someone who'd just worked out. It wasn't just the gym, though. She started buying new clothes, expensive stuff, dresses, lingerie, makeup she hadn't worn in years. And there I was, sitting there, wondering, who the hell is she doing this for? Because it sure wasn't for me. I tried to brush it off, told myself I was just being paranoid. But the more I watched, the clearer it became. She was hiding something. One night, I made the mistake of checking her phone again. I know. I shouldn't have. I'm not proud of it. But I had to. I needed proof. When I went to unlock it, though, she had changed her password. That was when it hit me. Whatever she was hiding, it was bad. I wasn't just imagining things. She was actively covering her tracks. That's when I knew I had to step it up. I wasn't going to let her make a fool of me. I needed the truth, no matter how ugly it was. So, I did what anyone in my position would do. I hired a private investigator. Yeah, it sounds dramatic, but when you're losing your mind, watching your wife slip away, and you have no clue why, you'll do anything to get answers. It wasn't cheap, but at that point, I didn't care. A few days later, I got what I was looking for, and man, did it hit hard. The private investigator sent me pictures. Pictures of my wife of 10 years, sitting in a restaurant with Nathan, holding his hand like they were some lovesick teenagers. I kept scrolling, and then I saw them kiss. Right there, in public, without a care in the world. No shame, no hesitation. Just two people who clearly didn't give a damn about anyone else. And this wasn't just a peck. This was a full-on kiss, passionate, the kind we hadn't shared in God knows how long. I stared at those photos for what felt like forever. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I just sat there, numb. It was real. She was with this guy, and she wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. All the suspicions I had, the ones I'd been dreading, were right there, in black and white. The next morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to confront her. I waited until she came back from one of her work trips. She walked in like nothing was wrong, smiling, making small talk, acting like we were still some happy couple. That's when my blood really started to boil. How could she be so calm, so innocent, like nothing had changed? I waited until she sat down on the couch, and then I laid it all out. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just pulled out my phone, opened the pictures, and handed it to her. Care to explain this? Her face didn't even change. She looked at the pictures, then at me, and just shrugged. Fucking shrugged. I'm not interested in doing this anymore, James, she said. Just like that. Cold as ice. No guilt. No remorse. No nothing. I'm tired of this boring life. You're not the same man I married. I could feel the anger rising inside me, but I tried to stay calm. So that's it? You cheat on me because you're bored? She didn't even flinch. I didn't cheat, James. I'm done with this marriage. I've already filed for divorce. That's when everything came crashing down. Divorce? She was already one step ahead of me. While I was sitting here, trying to figure out how to save what we had, she was ready to throw it all away like it meant nothing. You filed for divorce? I whispered, my voice barely audible. I told you, I'm done. I want to live fully. I can't do that with you anymore. You're stuck in this boring, monotonous existence, and I'm not wasting any more time trying to fix it. I sat there, stunned. She was done. Just like that. 10 years of marriage. The life we'd built together. The memories, good and bad. All of it meant nothing to her. She was ready to walk away without even feeling bad about it. And that's when something in me snapped. The pain, the betrayal. It was too much. I wasn't going to let her just walk away without facing the consequences. Not after everything we've been through, I said, my voice cold. Not after what you did. She crossed her arms and stared at me, completely unfazed. I'm not asking your permission, James. This is happening whether you like it or not. I clenched my fists, trying to control my temper. We'll see about that. She smirked, like she already knew she had the upper hand. You don't have a choice, she said, like the decision had already been made. But the truth was, I did have a choice. And I was about to make her regret every second of this betrayal. I never thought I'd be that guy. The one sitting in his living room, stunned and trying to piece together how the woman I had loved and trusted for a decade could just throw everything away so easily. When Emily told me she was done with our marriage, something inside me broke. It was like a door slammed shut, and all the air rushed out of the room. For a moment, I just felt empty, hollow. But underneath that shock and pain, something else started to build. Anger. No, it wasn't just anger. It was rage. I had spent 10 years building a life with her. 10 years of love, of struggle, of joy, and heartache. And she was just willing to toss it all away for some guy at work because I wasn't exciting enough? It didn't make sense. All our shared memories, our vacations, late-night talks about the future, suddenly felt meaningless, like some cruel joke. She was done. She had made up her mind to move on without me. And what stung the most was that she didn't even pretend to care. I wasn't just some husband to her anymore. I was another thing in her life she had grown bored with, but I wasn't going to let her get away with this. After the confrontation, I spent the next few days in a fog, playing everything over and over in my mind. How did I get here? What had I missed? Was there something I could have done differently to see it coming? But no matter how much I turned it over in my head, one thing remained clear. Emily had made a choice. She had chosen to betray me with Nathan, while I was out here, believing we were still working toward a future together. And now she wanted to walk away, leaving me to pick up the pieces. Hell no. I wasn't going to let her do that. Betrayal does something to you. It doesn't just hurt. It transforms you. That deep, gnawing pain twists and turns until it becomes something else. For me, it became pure, burning rage. A need to make her feel even a fraction of what I was going through. I couldn't let her just walk away, as though nothing mattered. Not after all the time we'd spent together. Not after how she had shattered my life in an instant. And then, something clicked in my mind. Clara, Emily's mom. Clara and I had always gotten along. Better than I had with Emily, honestly. Over the years, Clara had always been the one to see through Emily's facade. She had mentioned a few times that she was worried about Emily's attitude toward Nathan, and had even suggested that I keep an eye on Emily's late nights. At the time, I thought she was just being overly cautious. But now I knew she had been right all along. As the idea took shape in my mind, I realized that maybe, just maybe, Clara could help me make sense of this mess. I called her and asked if I could stop by. She agreed, her voice filled with concern. Clara had always liked me more than Emily, if I'm being honest. When I arrived at her house, she greeted me warmly, like she always had. Her home felt familiar, cozy, even a little nostalgic. We sat down, and I started telling her everything. The affair, the photos, the confrontation, everything. Clara listened, shaking her head in disbelief, disgust clear in her expression. I knew it, Clara said, pouring me a glass of wine. I always knew something wasn't right with Nathan. I just didn't want to believe Emily could be that reckless. I took a sip, the bitterness of the wine matching the bitterness in my chest. It's worse than reckless, Clara. She's thrown everything away. She's already filed for divorce. Clara squeezed my hand, her eyes filled with sympathy. I'm so sorry, James. You deserve so much more than this. And that's when something shifted. I'd noticed Clara before. She was attractive even after all these years. After her husband passed, she'd seemed so lonely, so vulnerable. And well, I was desperate enough to see an opportunity in that vulnerability. We spent hours talking, bottle after bottle of wine gone. Our conversation becoming more personal with every passing minute. I shared things I'd never told anyone. How angry I was, how betrayed I felt, how lost I had become. Clara listened, her nods comforting, offering support that I didn't realize I needed until that moment. Then, Clara opened up. She told me about her marriage, about the loneliness she had felt since her husband died, how sometimes she wished she had done things differently. The more we talked, the more she seemed to get closer. Her hand lingered on mine, her laugh grew softer, and the intensity in her eyes wasn't just sympathy anymore. It was something else. She was flirting with me, and in that moment, I didn't care. All I could see was an opportunity to hurt Emily back, an eye for an eye. Before I knew it, Clara was leaning in, her lips brushing mine. I didn't stop her. In fact, I pulled her closer. The whole thing felt surreal, like I wasn't even in control of my own body. But I didn't care. I wasn't thinking about guilt or right or wrong. I just wanted to make Emily feel the same way I did. Empty, abandoned, betrayed. The next morning when I woke up, I expected to feel something. Guilt, regret, maybe even shame. But I didn't feel anything. All I felt was cold. The emptiness inside me was so complete that I couldn't even process it. What I had done wasn't about attraction. It wasn't about anything physical. It was about power. It was about making sure Emily felt the hurt I was carrying. It was all about taking back control after Emily had destroyed everything I thought I had. I made sure I had that video saved in every possible place. There was no way I was losing my leverage. And that video? That was my tool, my weapon, to make Emily feel at least a fraction of the agony I'd been through. When you're betrayed like that, your mind takes you to dark places. It stops being about what's right or wrong. It becomes about making them pay. The next day, I waited for Emily to come home. The plan was already set in motion. When she walked in, I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I didn't care for small talk anymore. "We need to talk," I said, my voice unnervingly calm, too calm for what was about to hit her. She raised an eyebrow, probably thinking this was just going to be another argument about the divorce or her affair. She had no clue what was coming. I pulled out my phone and played the video. The shock on her face was priceless. Her eyes went wide, her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She was frozen, completely speechless. "Do you see this?" I said, keeping my tone steady. My finger hovered over the play button, letting her see it all. "This is your mother and me." Her face drained of color. She snapped back into reality long enough to snatch the phone from my hand. But it didn't matter. I had backups everywhere. She could smash the phone, but the video would still be out there. "You're a sick fuck," she hissed, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and fear. "How could you do this? How could you?" I cut her off. "I'm not the one who started this, Emily. You did. You threw our marriage away. You didn't care. You didn't care about me. You didn't care about what we built together. So don't act like you're the victim here." Her fists clenched. "This is disgusting. You're disgusting. How could you, with my mother?" I didn't flinch. "Let's be clear. This isn't about your mother. This is about you and the fact that I'm done playing nice." I leaned in, my voice turning colder. "I've got that video on multiple devices, and if you don't sign over your share of the house, I'm going to make sure it goes viral." Her eyes narrowed with pure hatred, but underneath it, I saw it, the fear. She was trapped, and she knew it. She knew I wasn't bluffing. "You wouldn't," she whispered, her voice barely audible. It wasn't a question. It was a desperate attempt to convince herself that I wasn't capable of doing something this messed up. "I will," I replied, no hesitation in my voice. "And you know I will." She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. But I didn't care. She was the same woman who had shattered me without a second thought, and I wasn't about to let her get away with it. "Please, James," she begged, her voice cracking. "Don't do this. You don't have to do this." I sat back in my chair, crossing my arms. You should have thought about that before you fucked Nathan. You should have thought about that before you decided I wasn't good enough for you anymore. Now this is your reality. I could feel my pulse quicken, my anger flaring up again. You sign over the house, and I keep the video to myself. Don't, and I'll make sure the whole world sees it. Your friends, your coworkers, your family, and yeah, your mother. Imagine how that plays out. Think about what they'll say. Emily was crying freely now, but I couldn't find a single ounce of sympathy for her. For a split second, I almost felt something. Pity, maybe. But it was gone as quickly as it came. She deserved every bit of this. What's it going to be? I asked, my voice cutting through her sobs. She didn't respond right away. She paced around the room, rubbing her temples, muttering to herself. I could tell she was desperately trying to figure out a way out of this, but there was no escape. She was trapped, and she knew it. After what felt like an eternity, she stopped, looked at me, and said, "Fine, I'll sign. Just don't release the video." I nodded. Good choice. The next day, we met with the lawyers. Emily signed the papers, giving up her claim to the house. I didn't feel bad, not even a little. In fact, part of me felt victorious, like I had won something in this messed up game. She had betrayed me, and now I had made sure she paid for it. When it was all over, I watched her leave the lawyer's office, her shoulders slumped, looking like a shell of the woman I once knew. For a second, I thought about what might have been, how different things could have been if she hadn't cheated, if she hadn't torn everything apart. But then, just as quickly, I reminded myself of what she'd done, and all those what-ifs disappeared. I had the house. I had my revenge. But did it make me feel better? Not really. In the end, it was a hollow victory. I had my revenge, but I couldn't shake the emptiness that lingered. Sure, I got what I wanted. The house was mine. Emily was out of my life. At least that's what I told myself. I had hurt her where it mattered, but it didn't fill the void. I couldn't stand being in that house anymore. Every corner, every room, reminded me of her, of us. The life we built together, now shattered. The kitchen, where we used to cook meals together, now just a reminder of all the nights I ate alone while she was with Nathan. The living room, where we had once snuggled together on the couch, now felt like a tomb full of memories I just wanted to bury. Staying in that house was becoming unbearable. Every inch of it felt suffocating, a constant reminder of everything that had gone wrong. I couldn't stand the thought of living there anymore. So, I made a decision. I was going to sell it. I didn't need it. Not anymore. And honestly, I didn't even want it. The house had become a symbol of everything I'd lost. Trust, time, love. It was a constant reminder of Emily's betrayal. Letting it go felt like the only way I could truly break free from everything. But the process wasn't as easy as I thought. Putting the house on the market was one thing, but every time I stepped through those doors, the memories came flooding back, unwanted, relentless. Every time I showed the house to potential buyers, I found myself haunted by the what-ifs. What if Emily hadn't cheated? What if we hadn't let things fester and actually worked through our issues? What if I hadn't allowed myself to become the man I never wanted to be? The one who blackmailed his wife and slept with her mother just to get even. Those thoughts tore at me. I tried to drown them out with work, booze, anything that would fill the void, but eventually, the weight of it all came crashing down. One night, after I'd had a little too much to drink, I found myself sitting in the empty house, alone in the silence. And that silence? It felt suffocating. I realized I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep punishing myself by holding on to everything that reminded me of her. It was as though the house was slowly suffocating me, burying me in all the memories. So, I did what anyone would do when they're drowning. I reached out to old friends, people I hadn't spoken to in years, but who I had lost touch with because Emily and I had closed ourselves off from the world. It felt like I had forgotten how to be anything but her husband. Reconnecting with them felt like a lifeline. They didn't judge. They didn't ask me to explain everything. They just listened, gave their support, and reminded me that life didn't end after a divorce. One night, After a few rounds of drinks and catching up, my friend Ethan turned to me and said, "You know what you need, man? You need to get out of here," he continued. "Take a break. Clear your head. You need to leave all this behind for a while. Go somewhere new. See the world." At first, I laughed it off. A trip? I could barely get out of bed in the mornings, let alone go on vacation. But as the words settled in, the idea started to grow on me. What did I have to lose? The house was in the process of being sold. I had nothing tying me down anymore. Maybe a trip was exactly what I needed. So I started looking into it. Somewhere far enough away that I wouldn't run into the same old problems, but close enough to reality so it wasn't a complete escape. I considered places like Italy, France, Spain, maybe even Scotland. I'd always talked about visiting these places, but life had always gotten in the way. Now, I had the time. I had the means. I had nothing holding me back anymore. The decision was made. I was leaving it all behind. But it wasn't just about running away. It was about breaking free from everything, escaping the suffocating memories of Emily, the house, the person I had become during all of it. As I started planning, something shifted. For the first time in a long while, I felt a strange sense of hope. Maybe this was my chance. A chance for something new, something better. The house would be sold soon, and with it, I could finally sever that last tie to my old life. I needed to move on. I couldn't carry that weight anymore. Once the house was sold, I felt a strange lightness, like a part of me was finally free. The house that had once been full of dreams and promises was now just a hollow reminder of everything I had lost. The next day, I booked the flight. When I landed in Italy, it felt like stepping into a completely new world. The sights, the sounds, the energy. It was so different from the heavy, suffocating familiarity of home. I didn't have a rigid plan, just a list of places I wanted to see. Rome, Florence, Venice. I figured I'd start with the big tourist spots and see where the road took me. For the first time in months, I didn't feel weighed down by the past. I wandered through the ancient streets, stared at the art that had been created centuries ago, and sat in cafes, watching the world go by. I felt anonymous. I wasn't James, the guy whose wife had betrayed him. I was just another traveler, lost in the world. And I liked it. As the days turned into weeks, something began to change. Peace. I hadn't felt peace in so long. The anger, the hurt, the bitterness. It was still there, lurking, but it wasn't eating away at me anymore. The farther I got from Emily, from the house, the lighter I felt. I started to remember who I was before everything went wrong. I wasn't the bitter, revenge-driven person I had become. I was starting to remember the man I used to be, the one who loved life, who welcomed new experiences, who was open to the beauty of the world. And that's when I met her. It happened in Florence, in one of those tiny, hidden art galleries that only locals seem to know about. I was wandering through, lost in my own thoughts, when I saw her. Sophie. She was in the corner, so absorbed in her work that she seemed to be in another world. Her dark hair was pulled up messily, and her hands were covered in paint. There was something about her, an energy of freedom, that instantly caught my attention. She moved like she didn't have a care in the world, like she was dancing to a rhythm only she could hear. She had this way of living that was so raw, so real, completely free from the weight of all the nonsense most people get bogged down by. And it was such a sharp contrast to everything I had just left behind. Where Emily had been cold, calculating, and distant, Sophie was warm, spontaneous, and alive. I found myself walking toward her without even thinking about it. And before I knew it, we were talking. She was an artist, of course, Italian, born and raised in Florence. She lived in a small apartment above the gallery and spent her days painting, sculpting, and creating anything that inspired her. She saw the world in a way that fascinated me, finding beauty in the smallest, most unexpected places. We talked for hours, lost in conversation, and by the end of the day, I knew I wanted to see her again. Over the next few weeks, Sophie and I became inseparable. We spent our days wandering the streets of Florence, visiting galleries, or just sitting by the river, talking about everything and nothing at all. Her perspective on life was refreshing. She wasn't jaded or cynical like I had become. She didn't care about my past or my baggage. She was just there, fully present. And for the first time in a long while, I started to be present too. Sophie helped me rediscover pieces of myself that I thought had been lost forever. The part of me that still believed in happiness, that still believed in love, that still thought life could be beautiful despite all the pain. She showed me that it was okay to let go. Let go of the hurt, the grudges, the anger. She taught me that starting fresh was possible, that I could move forward without dragging the past with me. One night, we sat on the rooftop of her apartment, watching the sunset. She had her sketchbook out, doodling away, and I just sat there, feeling peaceful for the first time in ages. I wasn't thinking about Emily, or the house, or all the revenge I had plotted. I was just there in the moment with Sophie, with the warm breeze and the soft glow of the sunset. And in that moment, something clicked. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. The whole revenge thing? It had been fleeting, a temporary satisfaction, but it hadn't healed me. Being with Sophie, being away from everything that had happened, that was what was healing me. I turned to her and said, "You know, I never thought I'd be able to let go of all of it. The anger, the bitterness. I thought that was just who I was now. But with you, I don't feel that anymore." She smiled that carefree, beautiful smile of hers and said, "Life's too short to hold on to pain, James. You've got to let it go, or it'll eat you alive." And she was right. I had spent so much time wrapped up in my own anger, letting Emily's betrayal define me. But here I was, halfway across the world, with a woman who made me feel alive again. And for the first time, I understood something fundamental. My happiness didn't depend on getting revenge. It didn't depend on making Emily suffer for what she had done to me. My happiness was mine to claim, and it was about me. My ability to move on, to leave the past behind, and to free myself from the weight I had carried for so long. By the time my trip ended, I was a different person. The man who had left to escape his past wasn't the same man who was coming back. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was free. Free from Emily. Free from the past. Free from the version of myself I had grown to resent. And I had Sophie to thank for that. She had shown me that life wasn't over, that there was still so much possibility out there. She didn't just help me rediscover life. I had rediscovered myself,